Kate, thanks so much for joining us today for our ESG Influencers series. I wanted to start by just asking you to look back a little bit at your career and maybe talk to us a little bit about what's driven your passion for sustainable and ESG investing, and which areas really interest you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for having me, Katrina. So I started over 5 years ago as a trainee investment manager, and I think fairly quickly I discovered this whole different world of kind of ethical and ESG investments, and I immediately was drawn to it. It's been something that I've been focused on throughout my career now. I really like the idea that you can influence positive changes in the world as well as making investment returns. And I think it's just a win-win for everyone, and I love being a part of that.
I mean, even during your career, you must have seen that, you know, the huge transformation in this part of the industry to now for it to be a sort of mainstream part of people's investment discussions and portfolios. That's a huge change.
Absolutely. I think when I started, there was a lot more kind of ethical funds, values-based restrictions, things like alcohol restrictions, which you never really see so much nowadays because it's a lot more focused on not what you don't want to invest in, but what you do want to invest in. And as you say, yeah, it's grown so much where it's now becoming part of the mainstream, and part of what we're requiring from our fund managers is how they look at ESG criteria.
And what are you hearing from your clients on this, and how are you trying to meet their needs? Obviously, they do vary very much between clients, but what are the big messages coming out there?
Yeah, it's very similar. You still do get a few clients who have specific things that they just don't want to see in their portfolio, but what you hear a lot more is they've heard about a specific issue, or they're worried about climate change or something like that, and they more specifically want their investments tailored around these issues rather than just a kind of generic strategy. I think we're quite lucky that we create bespoke portfolios for our clients, so we can figure out with them exactly what they want from a portfolio and exactly what financial but also non-financial objectives they're trying to achieve, and try and tailor a portfolio around that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to give us a bit more detail about how you construct those portfolios and what they might look like. I mean, do you look at active and passive funds in this area, for example?
We do. I personally do prefer active funds. I think the areas of sustainability and ESG, in some cases, it can't be quantified in the same way as a lot of other financial metrics. You know, some of the areas are a little more subjective, or they're a bit more nuanced. And I think it's actually a great area where active managers can add additional value by taking that kind of nuanced look towards these different issues. So yeah, I personally prefer to use active funds. We do cover a few passive funds as well. It's always useful to have them around, and there are some really interesting passive funds out there. But yeah, when we're constructing portfolios for clients, it is all about the kind of communication and relationship with your investment manager. We train all our investment managers now to be very fluent on ESG topics, and they've got a lot of resource in-house so that they can have these conversations, and they can also then construct a portfolio specifically around those objectives.
And in terms of due diligence on the funds that you're looking at, what's really, really important to you when you're speaking to fund managers, trying to get behind the greenwash of what they're telling you in their marketing about finding out exactly what they're doing? What's really key to you when you have those discussions? Yeah,
I think I would say there's three main things that I personally think about the most, although there's a lot that goes into our due diligence. But I would say that first off, when they're talking about integrating ESG in whatever form that company has defined it, pretty much every fund nowadays will tell me that they integrate ESG. I want to see how exactly that is influencing the investment decisions that you make. If you don't have any examples of how looking at ESG factors with these different companies has then influenced how you've constructed that portfolio, then you're just like every other fund who comes in with a nice shiny slide saying that they have ESG integrated. I think the second thing is looking specifically at their stewardship, their voting and their engagement. because I think this is actually a huge area where big asset managers can make a difference, is with their relationships with the companies they invest in and trying to communicate and influence how those companies are run. So I really like to see a good voting and engagement policy with good examples of what they've been doing. And the third one is really, it's almost a subjective thing, but I think it's such a growing area. You get a lot of fund managers who are now moving into this area. I like to see how passionate that fund manager is. I feel like I can trust them a lot more with my clients' money if I know they care as much as I do and they care as much as my clients do about the specific issues they're trying to address.
Yes, that's you want to get that sense that they're not just following what's being put down. As you say, this is a huge growth area and they're just ticking some boxes to get you interested. You want to hear what they're doing. Do you use any sort of ratings or global standards that you value? How does that come into it? I know you do a lot of your own research, but
yes. Yeah, there's a few different things. I think for collectives specifically, we do have MSCI, which can do MSCI ESG Manager, which does a look through of the holdings of the fund, so it can come up with the overall ESG score for the fund and also areas of business involvement and things like that, which we do use as a very light touch, as more of a kind of piece of information rather than any kind of wider screening. One of the things that we do ask of all funds is that they're signed up to the UNPRI and they are signed up to the UK Stewardship Code, if that's kind of applicable for where the fund is based. But I think we're, at least with those two things as a baseline for us, it means that they're at least having to consider their voting and engagement and their ESG integration to a certain level. So those are kind of almost the base kind of global norms that we should expect from them, and then we build the further levels of due diligence above that.
What are you seeing just in terms of product development there that's sort of interesting to you? I mean, obviously we've seen a lot of new products launched or repurposed. What sort of sense do you get about the market? And also, I suppose, maybe are there gaps there that where you'd like to see more products launched in those areas?
No, definitely. I would say one of the biggest gaps I find is more kind of private equity impact vehicles. We get a lot of impact funds at the moment, but I think in reality, it's very hard to generate a proper classic definition of impact through investing through public markets. And a lot of our clients come to us with the request as well. They want to be involved in these smaller companies where their money can go directly to have an influence. It's very difficult with retail clients, and it's something I'd love to see a little bit more of, is some private equity fund structures that can have retail investors so they know that they're investing in a space where they have some real impact.
And what do you see as areas where you'd like to see, obviously that we know some of the challenges for fund selectors and investors in this space around ratings and consistency in that area. In terms of the information you're getting provided by fund groups, what would you like to see them give more in certain areas?
I think there needs to be kind of more cooperation on how we label and describe funds. I know that the EU taxonomy, at least for European funds, may go some way towards this, but I could give you a list of 6 sustainable funds that we cover that all do different things, whether they have exclusions or it's kind of some positive themes or a best-in-class approach. So even though they've all got the same label, they're all doing different things. And I think for the investor who's getting into sustainable investment and wants to start allocating their money there, it's very difficult for them to understand the differences between all these funds and what they're all trying to achieve, because I think all the approaches they're taking are valid, but it's just a matter of better communicating exactly what these funds are hoping to achieve with their investments, because the blanket term sustainable is covering almost too many things.
Yes, yeah, I think it's a common area of, we do hear a lot of people talking about that as a big issue, and hopefully there will be some solutions as the industry evolves through this. I wanted to ask as well about how you measure the impact of your own portfolios and how you sort of communicate that to clients, because obviously that's what they're very interested in, isn't it, is to the impact they're having.
And that's another area which is incredibly difficult to do, and especially where you've got a portfolio that's invested in mostly collectives. Each of those underlying collectives may measure their impact, but in slightly different ways. So this is another area where it's very hard to kind of pull that all together and give your client a specific, you have had X amount of impact on this issue. We do have our own tools in-house. We've got our MSCI ESG manager, bit of a mouthful, all of those acronyms, but it does do our kind of SDG net alignment to the 17 SDGs. So we are able to do that in a more uniform way, at least across our portfolios, using that tool. But as I say, it is very difficult given the amount of variation in the way these things are measured from firm to firm, and it is something that I hope we can work on even more, because clients are more and more becoming interested in exactly what their impact is.
Yes, and just sort of finally, just sort of looking forward, where do you see the big sort of themes or areas of real interest to investors in this area going forwards? And obviously a lot of climate change is a huge topic on their agendas, but what areas are particularly of interest to you at the moment?
Yeah, no, I think climate change is obviously the huge one at the moment. I think we've seen a lot of positive trends over the last year of more and more fiscal stimulus going in towards climate change. We had the EU announce that a quarter of its COVID stimulus budget would be spent on climate action. We've now had Biden elected in the US and rejoining the Paris Agreement. So there are so many really exciting tailwinds in this area and kind of investing in clean energy and climate change. So we're going to see a lot more from that, I think, going forwards. And I also think for me, one of the big areas where as investors we can really start to not only encourage change but make some good financial returns for our clients is those companies that have gone from not really looking at it, not really being interested, not caring, to actually starting to change themselves and become a far more positive and sustainable company, and kind of getting involved at that stage and using our influence and getting in early not only helps propel that company to make these changes and encourages them, but also that means we're getting in there just before they hit that sweet spot for ESG returns. So win-win again.
Yeah, so you can go on that journey with them as they and influence them throughout that time. No, that's really interesting. Definitely worth keeping an eye on some of those. Well, it's been great to talk to you today, Kate. Thank you so much for giving that overview of what you're doing and giving some more detail around some of those areas of key interest to you. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you soon.